And off we go. So hello everybody and welcome to this e-learning network webinar. Today we've got David James from Loop and we're going to be looking and talking about the learning design for the point of work. Just a quick word that you may have noticed that there is a poll in progress. If I could ask everybody to just quickly fill that information in. There will be another poll at the end, so look out for that. This current poll will be switched off after around about 5-10 minutes. So if everybody could please pop the information in there that we're looking for, that would be very much appreciated. We have a Q&A function as part of the Zoom webinar software that we use. So David's going to be asking some questions as we go along, and we will ask you to respond in there. We are anticipating possibly over 100 attendees today. So please forgive us if we don't quite get to every single query or question. We also have a chat function as well. And just if everybody could make sure that when they type into the chat that they make the sentence so that it's actually visible by everybody, that would be fantastic. We're also live streaming on YouTube today because of the large number of anticipated attendees. So if this doesn't work for you, you can always catch us on there. So without further ado, I will hand over to David.
Thank you very much, Michael, and hello, everybody. By way of introduction, as you know, I'm David James, and whilst I'm digital learning strategist at Loop now, I've been in L&D for 20 years. 8 of those, as you'll see on the left-hand side there, I spent at Disney. Here I am with the boss. I led
David, learning. Just to let you know, I can't. Have you shared your screen?
Oh, let me. Right, let me.
Aha.
Here we go.
There you are.
Right now, hopefully everyone can see.
Yes.
It's not so much a mystery. There I am on the left, as I mentioned, with my old boss, Mickey Mouse. I was at Disney, as I mentioned, for 8 years, and I led learning and development for Europe, Middle East, and Africa while I was there. I've always believed in the power of technology to help us all achieve more at work and in our careers. And like Tom Cruise here on the right in Minority Report, I believe that we can grab information, know-how, and insights in real time at the point of need itself. Despite the point of this movie perhaps being about the precognition stuff that was ethically dubious at best. This is the opportunity, point of work being, I see as the huge opportunity for learning and development to assist our people at their moments of need, influencing and enhancing their everyday working when they face their friction. But before we start looking at our clients and their points of work, I'd like us to hold the mirror up at ourselves first, please. And please, could you write your responses in the chat function in response to what will you do if you need to know something or know how to do something for your job today? So at your point of need, what will you do? I understand, Michael, you're
yes,
you're keeping an eye on the chat.
Yeah, pretty much everybody's writing Google. Google, YouTube. John would ask a colleague or a member of the team. So would Charmaine as well. Yes, Google, YouTube, and colleague seems to be very, very popular. There's Gary would search his intranet, and Jamie would look at lynda.com as well. Yeah, so I would say the most popular answers coming through are Google, colleague, and another team member.
Okay, brilliant. Well, it will come as no surprise then that this is what we all do. This piece of research was done and published by D. Greed in 2016, how the workforce really learns. You see at the top there, frequency, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And then the responses to what we do self-directed, well, it's categorized, self-directed and L&D led. You can see that most people will go to web search. I don't always say Google because I stood up at a Microsoft conference once and I said, of course, we all Google it. And the room said, bing. So I've learned to just say web search. We've got peer interactions. Of course, we might ask colleagues, but there's more richness to peer interactions. We might just be in the presence of colleagues in meetings. They might be observing. This might be conversations. So perhaps not just as responsive. We have our trusted articles and blogs, whether we go to lynda.com, whether we go to Harvard, Fast Company, Forbes, or any more specific articles and blogs, and likewise videos, whether they be instructional, whether they be tutorials, or whether they be more insightful. And as it goes off more into the monthly and quarterly, you may recognize stuff that you do less frequently. And then below the line, we've got the L&D led stuff. And I'm not devaluing any of this. I think that there's huge richness in coaching and mentoring, perhaps the most valuable and insightful development methods there are. We have e-learning courses and instructor led classes. The only thing I'd ask here is that you apply a critical lens to ask, do your people engage in e-learning courses to help them with what they need to know and know how to do for their jobs more frequently than quarterly or less? And instructor-led classes, again, incredibly rich, but do people really attend those quarterly? There was another piece of research by D. Greed that had respondents say that they hadn't attended a course of any kind in the last 2 years. So again, apply your critical lens. And whilst I'm not bemoaning what we do below the line, what I am saying is that there is an enormous amount more appetite than is being satisfied by learning and development at the point of work. And this is, as I mentioned, where I think the huge opportunity is for us. But why does it seem people are engaging less with our stuff? To answer this, let's explore the reasons why people want to learn online at work. So I've got one more question for you before we go deeper into the content. What do you think is the number one reason why people want to learn online at work? Now, I asked this question on the CIPD live class that I run, and very recently they said the word online was a slight misnomer, and that if I'd have just said, what's the number one reason why people want to learn at work, then they might have got the answer I'm looking for. So according to towards Maturity's 3 learner voice reports, why do people want to learn online at work? Michael, have you got some responses coming through?
Yes, lots coming through. So most of them are sort of, quick, easy. Christine says to learn at a time that works for them and in bite-sized chunks. But most of the guys are sort of thinking easy, quick, get what you want when you need it, just in time. Mm-hmm. To get better faster. Yeah. People sort of thinking about what needs to happen in real time. Mm-hmm. Lizzie says motivated at a point of need. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you need to do something. So that provides the motivation. Jamie says trusted as well. The number one reason why people want to learn online at work, so that Jamie thinks that people trust sort of the content that they would find. Mm-hmm. Okay. Matt believes it's because they love doing compliance courses. Don't we all, Matt?
I'd like to see your compliance training, Matt. The answer is overwhelmingly number one of all of these. I've also seen the learner landscape, some learner landscape stuff that Towards Maturity do within organizations, and this comes top: to do the jobs better and faster. And the reason that I've asked these 2 questions is to level this out. First of all, to recognize we are our clients. We do the same stuff. And a lot of the time, the motivations are the same. And I'll be coming back to that in one moment. But before I do, I'd have to say that expectations of L&D have changed. We're no longer the subject matter experts we used to be due to ubiquitous connectivity to the world's information and know-how. And many of us have refocused to become experts in learning, which I believe, again, is a huge misnomer. Our businesses, leaders, and colleagues don't need learning experts, but they do need our help. And this is what we're going to be covering. Got 3 sections today, because designing for the point of work is fundamentally different from traditional learning design, whether that be instructional design online or face-to-face. It's laser focused on helping people to do what they're trying to do, but better. It's not about engaging people in what we already do with whizzy additions such as animations, interactive videos, gamification, and the like. To engage people in the first place, we need to solve real problems to make sure that what we're designing is fit for purpose. We need to run experiments rather than programs to ensure we're solving the problems sufficiently. And rather than big bang launches of systems and content, we need to scale what we know works in order to solve those real problems organization-wide. So let's start with real problems. Firstly, Nipun Sharma is not the bad guy. Nipun works for Adobe Captivate and published this article on e-learning industry in March. For me, his view is representative of many in L&D. Now, in the context of solving real problems, I'm going to ask you, what do you think Nipun identified as the biggest challenge for L&D in 2018? Sorry, Michael, I'm really getting you to work here.
That's what I'm
So
here
what
for.
What do you think, guys, is the number one learning and development challenge for 2018, according to Nipun Sharma at Adobe Captivate?
Okay, let's have a look. Lots of different answers. New technologies and technical knowledge. Engagement is coming through as well.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of people said exactly the same thing with time. Engagement and getting the right training in front of the right person.
Mm-hmm.
So relevance. Engagement coming through again. John's got an interesting one. Knowledge attainment, not necessarily learning. So kind of a moving of the goalposts as to how we consider the role of L&D.
Yeah.
Genuine behavioral change as well. Lots and lots and lots of different answers. Learning that actually affects performance.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose the themes are kind of getting the right training in front of the right person, mm-hmm. with the right structure to engage them and motivate them to actually do it.
So a real variety there. And I'm going to say that that from your summary there, Michael, plenty of people are on the right lines. According to Nipun Sharma, the number one, sound like somebody reading Top of the Pops. The number one learning development challenge for 2018 was lack of learner engagement and motivation.
Well done to everybody who got that right.
But I'm here to tell you that it's not. I believe the biggest challenge facing learning and development in 2018 and beyond is continuing to do the same things and expecting different results. These survey results, published by Jane Hart at her C4LPT website, rather than being gospel, I must admit straight away, I believe they're a good barometer of where we're standing right now in terms of learning and development. Thousands of people responded to this survey, voting classroom training and e-learning among the least important and valuable ways of learning in the workplace. Because, now only in my opinion, we don't solve the real problems of our clients at the time and in ways they value. But when you look at the top of the list, then you see the stuff that they value and find most important. And again, it's not dissimilar to what we said before. The daily work experiences, i.e. doing the job, the day-to-day, knowledge sharing within the team, the peer interactions, web search, as we'd said before, and trusted web sources, they all point towards immediacy and point of need. The problem much of the time is that L&D see everything through a learning lens. And as with this analogy, everything looks like a learning opportunity. Our clients see their problems more in terms of work and people challenges and struggle to make the links between our products and what they're trying to achieve. Let me show you what is wrong with the current approach. When we translate business needs into learning needs, things get lost in translation. Learning needs are often identified by others. We conduct a training needs analysis with managers and leaders, with HR as well, and then we aggregate common needs. We address these often with standardized training because of the need to scale as well as for consistency. And we deliver final products en masse, whether that be face-to-face scheduled training or e-learning. And of course, we measure by attendance completion, assessment, and then a retrofit ROI, because we've already decided it's going to be a program or e-learning, and then we've got to wonder how we prove that that was valuable. However, Andrew Jacobs, in a recent blog that he wrote called Shopkeeper to Engineer, and I definitely strongly recommend that, that you take a look. Andrew is the L&D transformation lead at Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. He's challenged L&D to step away from behind the counter and stop being the shopkeepers who will give people what they ask for in terms of the programs and e-learning, and start thinking of themselves as their engineers and truly understand how things really work. And there's plenty we can learn from organizations who are already doing digital really well. As the quote says, there is a reason that Amazon is achieving results others are not, because they focus heavily on friction-free customer experiences. On the outside, it looks as if Amazon is just about shopping. ASOS the same. But what they're really in the business of is creating frictionless customer experiences. The quote here explains this. Friction-free isn't just a buzzword, it's a focus, a digital focus that's setting extraordinary companies apart from ordinary ones in the digital economy. And I don't need to tell you that are being very successful with it too. So let's see what friction looks like as opposed to learning needs. So employee friction, when you're looking at friction, we seek to understand the real blockers to performance and results. We're not making any assumptions around individuals and their needs. We validate with these with the workers themselves. So we're not looking to get engagement in content and programs. We're simply looking to see if we're identifying, we've identified the things that are stopping workers from achieving the things that perhaps they're Googling or asking, or not getting answers at all. Friction experienced is specifically addressed, and digital resources help us to scale this. So we're using technology to scale, not necessarily just to come down. These are tested minimum valuable products to see how they work, and they're measured by the extent that they address the friction. And then what works is scaled and iterated. If I give you an example of how this is actually working, so ASOS are a great example. They seek to address employee friction rather than just the learning needs. They've recognized the friction their new starters experience as they join and address this friction even before their first day. They then guide and support them through to their probation. The same with new managers. How many companies start formally supporting managers weeks, months, or even years after they assume the role? ASOS do this from day one, guiding and supporting them to benefit from the collective experience of their most successful managers. So the first one was about solving real problems. So that at a theoretical level. I want to move on now to running experiments, which gets down into the nitty-gritty of exactly how. But I'll make no apologies at the outset. I've borrowed this slide, but the reason is because this is an approach that's being used across different functions at the moment, whether it started in software development and it's moved into marketing, and you can see this being used in learning and development now. And I've got an example which I'll share with you at the end of this section. But it does provide a good comparison between a traditional program and an experiment. Now, we all recognize that when we're looking, sorry, Michael, did you say something there?
No,
okay, sorry,
I thought I'd be hearing things.
I think I did. Now, we all recognize when we're looking at big programs, due to heavy investment of time, energy, money, and people's attention, we require a big strategy. We've all been there, saying that or hearing that programs are going to be transformational. Now, research usually involves more than just users. In the case that it says on here, in L&D's case, it requires us to understand perhaps what our peers are doing, what the latest research says, what vendors can offer us. In fact, a lot of the time, our users are at the back of the queue when it comes to research. Design and build are such heavy, costly elements, and they can actually take several months and several thousands of pounds before we even get to deliver a one-and-done program. Experiments, on the other hand, which you'll see at the bottom half of the slide, are light touch. They're user-centric and designed to get a minimum valuable product into the hands of the people who need it in order to solve their real problems. The little strategy focuses on a real problem that the user is experiencing. Now, working with users to plan, design, launch, and measure can take only a few days. Insights are focused on how the solution is addressing the real problem, and then it's scaled based on its ability to equip users to perform. Now, this might seem particularly abstract and difficult to do, and maybe something that requires an enormous amount of stakeholder buy-in. But I can tell you that it doesn't, because it's easier, lighter, far less expensive, requires far less attention, and as I mentioned above, it's focused on solving real problems, the pain points experienced by your clients. Running experiments starts with the client by simply understanding the user journey and where they're experiencing friction. You will get a great idea of what it is you're looking to build, your minimum valuable product, in order to achieve a defined goal. So your experiment starting with your users, there may be a hunch that comes from elsewhere, such as HR or leaders may come to you and say, look, our line managers need to be better at addressing poor performance. But then it quickly moves on to the actual user themselves to recognize what they're doing and what they need help with. This is best done with only 5 users who are experiencing the friction, 1 wall and lots of post-it notes. Ask them to recognize the friction that is stopping them from performing and organize their friction in a way that makes sense to them. So as you can see, those post-it notes, if you've got 5 people in the room, they're writing down the questions, situations, and challenges that they face that are stopping them from performing that defined thing. Going back to the example before, addressing poor performance with their team members. If we can understand the questions, situations, and challenges they face that's stopping them from doing this now, then we're able to help them. At the end of this exercise, you want to be able to step back from the wall with your users, with your clients, and ask, if we address this friction together, do you think you'd be able to do X? In this case, address the poor performance of your team members. It's about the doing. It's about them getting the results and you both developing a solution that supports and guides them towards that. And to make the most of this process, and I've got down, you'll see the logo down at the bottom, Southern Labs. This is an article that they've written on how to create effective customer journey maps, which I believe maps brilliantly to learning and development. So first of all, it's about clearly defining the problem the map is aiming to solve. So if you've got the hunch from before that we don't believe that managers are equipped to deal with poor performance, with your 5 managers in a room, you want to make sure and validate with them that that's what they're not able to do. This isn't about perhaps more traditional approaches, which is we need you to do this. The way that you'll gain traction is helping them to do what they're trying to do. And so we're framing it in the context of their roles rather than a retrofit. So what we're trying to do is define the actual problem. And then you create the maps collaboratively with them. So really your role is asking the questions and prompting them and questioning, trying to aggregate where there might be crossover or similarities in the friction, but not trying to overrepresent and certainly not trying to aggregate into common needs. We want their actual experiences across the wall. Emotion is absolutely critical because we can help to address this rather than ignore it. Anxiety is usually a bit of a problem here. The anticipation that there might be a negative response. All of these things can help to be addressed rather than ignored. We should think broadly about where the journey starts and it ends. So you'll see if I take this back, you've got the orange post-it notes that run in across the top. That can be a way of indicating when this friction is being experienced and when it would be helpful to address that friction so that we are supporting people as they experience the friction or before. And then finally, pay close attention to the final experience. So what this would look like and be experienced for the end user. And rather than making any assumptions or holding that on ourselves and putting pressure on us to design that, again, you have the users describe how that would best benefit them. This is an example of how I've worked with clients on Induction. So recent new starters told us the friction they were experiencing when joining the company, and as well as what we work with them on the how of guiding and supporting them to do. So it's all about the action and the performance. At one company, the goal that the induction is to achieve, according to new starters themselves, was how to get stuff done when they joined. So we like to call it induction or onboarding, but when we got this down to the goal of the individuals, it was all about how to get stuff done. New starter said that this was their primary motivation, but towards passing their probation. So we worked with them on helping them achieve their goals, which was clearly defined, the scope and the timing. Their emotion was accounted for, especially the anxiety of what to wear on their first day. So this is just a snapshot of that first user journey. And then what we do is we'd be able to run the experiment to build this out so that it was satisfying the needs of users as people use this. Again, going through that iterative stage that I showed you in one of the previous slides. And this is what it could look like. I said on the user journey, think about what that user experience could be. You've got a new starter, and their aim is to know how to do the right stuff towards their passing their probation. And so what it might look like, again, this is an example because your users should be telling you what they want that experience to look like. Okay, so this might be the Friday before. You get an SMS message or a push notification that says, hey, great, you're joining us on Monday. Here's some useful information in preparation. So we're not trying to train them. They've asked for this information. In the absence of this, looking to reduce anxiety and friction. And of course, with scaffolding the work, naturally, they'll meet their colleagues as they join. But then they might receive an email welcoming them to the team and sharing useful information on how to get themselves set up, just in case there's friction there. We know sometimes people don't have phones, other equipment, or logins. They might have another text message, or otherwise you could have posters with NFC technology or QR codes around the building where people could just hover their phone over and get an interactive or other map that will help them to guide themselves around the building. Again, it just saves them from the overwhelming experience of trying to show people and tell people everything on day one. They might get a video to share with them where colleagues are saying how they've got to know the right people at the organization that they're joining. You could organize cohorts of new starters to get together, knowing that some of the most important stuff about joining a new organization is knowing who's who and making connections from across the organization. And they might get another message to find out, to let them know how to find out what's going on in the organization, either socially or professionally. Another email, maybe the middle of the week after, to ask them if they know what's expected of them. And if they don't, then this is how they can find out. They can give them tips on the different types of communication that works at the organization, which is supporting them on meeting their stakeholders. And finally, you might want to give them some tips on how to stay on track if they want to assess themselves on whether they are, all towards passing their probation. And this is all an example. And do you know what? It seems really obvious that we might do this, but how many organizations would try to put all of that into a 2-hour session on when they first join, rather than split this out and try to anticipate in points of need at the point of work when people join. Now, when we're designing for the point of work, we're not looking at courses. Courses require you to stop work, whether that be face-to-face or e-learning, and are packed full of stuff that's anticipated that will help you to be educated in a particular topic. Designing for the point of work scaffolds and supports the work itself, where the true learning happens. Now, we could do this with resources that are laser focused on a response to friction, that can use text, images, videos, screen recordings, checklists, for example. It's local information, know-how, and insights that can be used to support and guide real action. Ideally, they'll be linked or into some kind of automated workflow that can get the right resources to the people to anticipate their friction when they're experiencing it. And you can use data to ensure that the resources are reaching the workers when and how they need it to make the required difference. And as I showed you before, it can be iterated based on both engagement and usefulness. And experiences are focused on what people are best at. So discussion, debate, questioning, practice, and simulation. Whilst on the other hand, they can help to eliminate what people aren't best at, which is the retention of large amounts of information and recalling information days and weeks later when certain situations occur. Experiences can be hosted to connect people with colleagues, peers, experts, and clients. And experiences may just be conversations hosted to where anticipated and experienced friction. But to the purist, doesn't this devalue the learning experience? No, this encourages higher value working. This is not about learning. The point of work is about the work, not about learning. This is about learning at the point of need. So what we've got to remember here is the primary motivator to want to learn online at work is to do the job better and faster. And the appetite for continuous support and guidance requires us to understand our users' experience and friction. So we need to look at learning, in inverted commas, in different ways when we consider the point of work. The point we're trying to affect is the moment of apply, according to Godfredson and Moshe in their 5 moments of need. This is an indication of what it might look like if there's genuine concern. So if, as an example, how do I do X here? How do I process my expenses? How do I get around? How do I communicate with my colleagues? Then we can share insight into how experienced colleagues already do this. And then armed with a little bit more know-how, information or insight, the individual will have more tools to try and give it a go and see how it works. Again, supporting real-life learning in the workplace. And when there's less awareness of a situation or a challenge, we can guide rather than support people who don't know what they don't know. We can surface the resources or conversations, picking them up and sharing what people in their position wish they'd known in these situations. Again, the information, insights, and know-how can inform action, or it might just reinforce the ideas that the individual would have already had and then help them apply that. So resources, what are these? So resources come in 3 formats. I've been doing this for years now, and I've never seen any deviation. They are, and coincidentally, they'll begin with an I. The first one is instruct, when the problem has already been solved. There's one recognized or efficient way of doing things at your company, and this is how you do it. Usually this can be shared with a screen recording with a voiceover. It might be, how do I use this spreadsheet? It might be, how do I book holidays here? How do I get to so-and-so? Or what's the etiquette when da-da-da? It's very easy. It's a how do I question with a this is how you do it here response. Of course, the world's more complex than that, so that doesn't cover everything. And so this is where we've got an informed resource. I generally call this aggregated best practice. If you were to ask somebody who's been at your organization for a few years, maybe a question like, how do you get promoted here? Or how do people generally communicate? Then what you're able to do is just aggregate best practice, and anyone who's been there anytime might say, look, if you want to get on here, you need to do 3 things. You need to really know your job. You need to show your key stakeholders and those key decision makers in your career that you're doing a great job and you're showing potential, and you need to keep an eye on the jobs board, just as an example. But of course, there are things even more complex and sensitive than that. And this is where the Inspire resource comes in. Oh yeah, first of all, Inform can generally be done with just text. Inspire, because of its complexity, and it would be an oversimplification to say, just do these 5 things. You'll want to look at somebody or understand how your colleagues generally deal with this. We had an example with one colleague. One of the points of friction was, how do you manage somebody who doesn't like you? Now, maybe there's a 4-box grid out there, but even then, that could be an oversimplification of a very complex and sensitive issue. So what we did was we interviewed a load of experienced managers. We asked them this question. With their responses, we were able to pull together a video montage that demonstrated that this wasn't a quick fix. This is a general way of being. It's about holding your people to account. But more importantly, over the video montage, you saw that there was license to add your own style to this as well. So as well as the complexity, there's a sensitivity. But there are generally only 3 types of resources. Instruct, where it's a video recording, a screen capture with voiceover, is usually the best way. Inform, where it's just some text in the form of an article or a blog, as long as it answers the question, is the most appropriate. And then inspire, where it's useful just to look at some people who've been through that pain and then see how they would have overcome it. And then the resource format itself, the most important part, so referring to the bottom, the most important part is that you're addressing a real point of friction, that this isn't assumed in any way, that your users have said, that is stopping me from achieving this. And then once you've got the actual friction point, you can tell them why it's important to address it. You can show them in the form of an instruct resource, tell them in the form of an inform resource, and inspire them in the form of an inspire resource. And then the final part is activate me. The point of work, the point of the point of work is the work itself. So if the way I say this is that if somebody had asked you this question and they're sitting next to you and they said, well, what do I do next? You do that. This is what activate is. There might be a point of reflection, especially if it's an inspire video. You might be asking, what do you think from what you've heard will be most appropriate for you to do next? Give them that opportunity, or prompt them with that opportunity to reflect, and then activate them. Or there might be just 5 key points in which you can say which of these 5 points are most appropriate to you with what you're going to do next. And then you're always thinking about trying to guide them towards a more confident and competent act of performing rather than just the learning. Another example, Sky run their people development team fully agile and run small experiments to address clearly defined problems. Their journey to agile and what it means practically has been published in a Fosway report that you can download that's called Ripping Up the Rulebook of People Development. But they could just have called it Doing Stuff That Works. The people development team at Sky use data to ensure that the problems they're looking to address are real problems. When a client asks them for their support, they will ask for the data to back up whether this is a problem or not. They'll work closely with the client to understand the friction being experienced and how they'll address it. And they don't run any courses and they don't have any e-learning. And this is all written in the report. They just develop resources that guide and support the work. And they also run 90-minute conversations that are agile and address specific points of need. And again, like it's a fascinating report on exactly this topic. The final step in learning design for the point of work is scaling what works. The old world thinking, as this reads, is you have these major initiatives that take months to implement. Truthfully, to gain momentum requires sprints, which are smaller projects or pilots that leverage partners to create those quick wins. So back to this slide. As was mentioned before, in comparison to the big strategy, the little one means doing what we said previously, solving a real problem by finding out from the users themselves what friction they're experiencing, hosting conversations and building resources to address the friction so those users can do the things they were unable to do before. And when they're performing to a level with the friction addressed, you can then take a look to see who else will benefit from this. This is in the insights section here on the bottom half. So you plan, design, launch, and measure with your user group before putting it in the hands of others to make sure that it addresses the friction they're also experiencing, and then use further insights for applicability to other areas. So with the example we used before, once you've got your working products and approach for recent new starters, you can go larger and automate the digital experience. And of course, there will always be iterations as the solution matures. When thinking about how this is applicable to other groups, Crossing the Chasm, the book by Jeffrey A. Moore, talks about how technology is adopted across demographics. You can see here that the labels are innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. Each of these segment the market, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. If you apply a similar philosophy to your projects, then rather than innovators, you've got people who are experiencing the friction acutely. These are the people who are experiencing the friction to such an extent that they really want it to be addressed, so they can perform and they can get their results. So if you work with them, where you can get them on board because there's need, there's appetite, and there's urgency. Then you want to go out to people you didn't immediately speak with about this. So in this case, it says your early adopters, and find out how the solution that is already working for another group may be applicable to them. Now, the definition of traction, according to the authors of another book called Traction, How Any Startup Can Get Explosive Growth, is helping people to do what they want to do better. And traction in these early stages means helping people who are experiencing friction keenly and who want help. Rather than people's willingness to adopt technology, it's more useful to consider their maturity within a role and see that there may be some more resistance the more experienced they are. But once you've got a working model and it's actually addressing friction, then you can cross the chasm in ways that successful tech companies do. This could be with smart marketing to highlight the efficacy of your solution and the results that it's getting with other groups, seeking to appeal to people who would go along with you. Now, you may not get to laggards, as with any approach, because not everybody experiences the same friction. And yes, of course, people might not be doing the job to the level required, but that's different friction. And you'll need to understand a little bit more before trying to apply the same solution. And if this worries you, consider that just because everybody attends a program or completes e-learning, even the keenest may not do anything as a result. This approach is fundamentally about overcoming friction in order to perform and deliver results, and not about attendance and completion. So I'm sure there are questions. I've seen alerts going off, even though I've not been able to see the comments yet. But those are my 3 steps to designing for the point of work. As you see, it's fundamentally different to traditional learning design. Number 1 is solve real problems rather than perceived problems. Like any digital or technology solution, it has to solve real problems. And the example that I give is that if applying technology to retail was easy and just about putting things on computers, then Walmart would be bigger than Amazon. Then House of Fraser wouldn't be having the problems it has, and ASOS wouldn't be a thing. They solve real problems, but that's because, number 2, they really understand their consumer, what their consumer's trying to do, and the friction that they're experiencing. So you work with and for your users, understanding their friction and not trying to aggregate any common learning needs. And then finally, it's almost the antithesis of traditional learning technology launches. There's no big bang top-down launch. This is find out what works and scale what works to avoid the pitfalls that the traditional approaches generally face. That's it for me. I would just say that I speak and write extensively about all of this stuff. You'll find a blog on the Loop website, and we can also have a chat on Twitter. But before we do, I believe we've got plenty of time for some questions. Michael, I'm sure you've seen these come in as we've been talking.
Yes, not so much more questions. So I popped the link to the Fosway report that you referred into the chat, so people could have a look at the information on the stuff you're talking about to do with Sky. Mm-hmm. So actually, John's asked a question, which is, does the measurement approach change for point of work learning? So talking about measuring.
So what do you mean? Does the measurement approach for point of work learning? So with this approach, what we've got to consider is, again, put ourselves in the shoes of our learner. We're at work. We get stuck or we experience friction. If we are continuing at the point of work, then like a great Google search, we'll grab the information we need to digest it, which gives us just enough confidence and competence to go and try, to go and apply what we've just done. And the learning occurs like with the doing. So we get real-time feedback, and that's our point of work. So as far as learning and development are concerned, our measure is always about the friction. Right at the outset, if you use the Sky example, they only work on stuff where there's data. And if there's data that there's a real problem, then they'll work with the client to resolve the problem. The measure is, was the problem solved? If we're looking at...
So John asks, so is Kirkpatrick still relevant?
Not in this, not in one iota. Kirkpatrick is dependent solely upon a learning event. And this isn't a learning event, this is a working event. So what we're doing is we are providing an intervention at the point of work, and our success is based on whether people are engaging with what we're doing, and that is an absolute baseline. So it's by no means our end result, but what we're looking at is, are we solving the real problem? Are we helping to resolve the real problem? It's much more binary than say a Kirkpatrick, but no, Kirkpatrick is not this at all.
Okay, so John says he's got it. It's sort of to measure the friction before and after, and
totally,
that's it.
Yeah, we have 100%. Yeah.
Okay, Paul's got a question, which is, where does developing colleagues' ability to deal with challenges before they experience the friction sit within this approach?
Sorry, say that again, Michael.
So where does developing a colleague's ability to deal with challenges before they experience friction sit within this approach? So kind of maybe solving the problem before it even occurs. So, smoothing it before friction happens.
Right. So if I understand that correctly, this is kind of what if we could get people to some kind of immersive training event before this happens? Now, look, this would be a great situation. And traditionally, when work was more repetitive and predictable, then you could get people very much to practice, and then you take. So it's kind of the learn before working approach that Charles Jennings talks about. And if you have got, and going back to the beginning of my career, I was a telephone operator at Lloyd's TSB Credit Card Services. It was a 3-week induction, and it was incredibly intensive and immersive. By the time I got onto the phones, I'd pretty much been doing the job in a safe environment. So it was quite new. But in more perhaps less predictable and more dynamic environments, if I look at my whole time at Disney, I joined that when I was quite junior. There was nothing that could have prepared me for what was going on. There was no immersive experience because internal clients, working with well, first of all, I was charged with turning around the experience, and there was no immersive or face-to-face experience that could have prepared me for that. But if taking this approach, that was back in 2006, what this would have been able to help me with is anything cultural that jarred with people around their friction. That would have been able to come to me to give me ways of both anticipating something, so I can almost see around the corner, as well as seeing what my colleagues were already doing. The value of this is that it's not replacing anything. Point of work, going back to that early slide about what we do when we need to know something or know how to do something, there's nothing there. So our clients are asking people and Google searching for what to do. So we are looking to plug gaps that I mean, I always can think of it like buckets. You've got huge water coming out of a bucket if your people are Googling elsewhere for stuff about how to do stuff within your company. So what I'm going a roundabout way of saying that I think in the modern world, it's hard to provide immersive experiences that look to anticipate all of this stuff. And in the world we live in today, where we are just a Google search away from finding out how to give performance reviews, how to dig a patio, and all of this stuff, we might as well capitalize on others' expertise digitally, rather than look and think, can we do this the old way? Mm-hmm. I don't know whether that answers the question, but in a roundabout kind of way. It's fundamentally different.
Okay. I understood that. So
okay, good.
I've got another question here from Jodie, which is very interesting, actually. She says that these projects do require a budget and therefore some sort of stakeholder buy-in. Do you find it necessary to A, quantify the cost of having an uneducated workforce, and B, be able to justify the spend in terms of ROI?
Look, I think that's a really good question. So when we normally do this with clients, we have to sell them with this new approach. And the reason we have to sell this is because there's so much wedded to traditional approaches. People will tell you that they like traditional training. And I believe that people do like coming together, and they do like the time away from work to meet with their colleagues, to reflect, and all of that great stuff. But there's a difference between what they like and what works. And I think that what actually changes as a result of a 1 day, 2 day, 3 day program does not equate to the cost that was actually spent on that. So you do need to take your people on a bit of a journey, as in, that's why I always ask the questions. What do you do when you need to know something or know how to do something inside or outside work? Then it blows the walls off, and you say, of course, that's what we all do. So how about, and then the 3 stages: solving real problems rather than perceived, running small experiments, and then scaling what works. It's so, and I always say as well, it's easier, faster, cheaper, more effective than traditional approaches. You do probably have to lay that out a little bit more and give the examples. It's what I've tried to do with Induction and the like on here. But the cost isn't huge. What I always say to people is, if you've got BAU, if you've got business as usual running, you've got all your courses, you've got your e-learning, and no one's shouting for anything more, don't try to fix that stuff. Fix the next big problem that's coming, and understand the problem and work in this way. When you've got one working example, it's really easy to say to folks, hey, should we do the next thing like this as well? And this is what Sky have done. This is what ASOS have done. This is what many organizations do. It's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's about gaining confidence in this new way, getting a working example that you're able to showcase, and then gaining traction that way. But it will require a bit of budget, especially if you've got no technology. But as you saw, the technology only happens with scaling. The wall with Post-it notes and understanding the richness of the friction, that we take you right up to the 3/4 done without even having any technology. It changes the conversation and really lets you in on what needs working on. And a lot of this stuff isn't massively urgent. Some people might get going with a SharePoint site, even though analytics are quite poor on that and the user experience isn't great. But if you can get a working example of this stuff working, then you can get traction, and then you can gain further investment. But it's all about small bets, not big bets.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Jodie likes she's quoted here and said the difference between what people like and what actually works is a good point. So yeah, let's have maybe 1 or 2 more. Foz has asked, said that in their industry, new colleagues have to read about 60 standard operating procedures within 2 weeks, and it ends up being a tick box exercise. I too have experienced things like that, and have you got any tips for how to deal with that using your approach?
Yeah, so I mean, look, there's a lot of pain there, and it goes right back to what problem are you solving. The fact that someone's read it doesn't mean they learnt it, and the fact they read it doesn't mean that anything will happen as a result. A lot of the time, to have read something and sign that you've read it is about devolving culpability from the organization down to the individual. So and that's what a lot of e-learning is about as well. It's not about actual change, it's just about mitigating risk, and it's the fastest, most efficient way of doing this. But if you can go back to asking the question, what's the real problem that we're looking to solve with this vast amount of text? And then if you can look and think, well, so that's that's the problem we're trying to solve. Now look at our users. What's the goal that they're trying to achieve that, in conjunction with this? And then let's have a look at their friction. I've not seen anything where that doesn't work, but it does take a while to get out of the mentality of, and I won't say this is what it is, but so much L&D is, we need you to know this, or we need you to behave like this. And I don't know about you, but I'm an adult. And as soon as someone says that to me, I have a look and I think, well, you don't know my job. And because you don't know my job, you don't know whether I'm doing it or not. So as you were. But if you can flip this around and say and ask people, well, we see this as a bit of a problem. How does this work in your world? And then understand what they're trying to achieve and the friction points. You just learn a whole lot more.
Okay, brilliant. Actually, in relation to sort of kind of something that you kind of just alluded to, Syed's asked, is there a place for L&D in businesses in the future? Is this a, will L&D be, not needed anymore, do you think?
So I think it depends. I think that there's going to be less and less need for content delivery, because I think that could be automated. You've got organizations such as Filtered who are getting content out to people based on their needs and their preferences. So if you are a shopkeeper, I think that role will diminish over time. But there is nobody working on the friction in your organization, helping people swiftly make transitions. I mean, look. I mean, I'll ask everybody: how long are you leaving new managers unsupported in your organisation during this career change? And if you're leaving them for more than a day, then there's a role for L&D. But in the running of courses and dissemination of content, I'd say that's got a really short shelf life.
Okay, brilliant. And let's have one last question from Tom. And he's asked, what would happen if the goalposts keep changing? For example, in the previous role, the source of friction kept changing as the process and procedures kept changing as well. And this meant all the work that he'd been doing went to waste. Do you have any advice on how, he could sort of deal with this situation better in the future?
Oh dear, that's an emotively written text.
Yeah.
Do you know what? And I don't feel I'm going to do it justice by oversimplifying it. I'd love to have a more in-depth conversation about it, but I'll give you a general view. If you can go back to beyond the process and procedures, back to the problem, I wonder whether the problem changes much. The way that people deal with it, and I'll give you an example. For every organisation introducing competency frameworks and all of this stuff, they're not addressing the real problem. They're addressing the problem that learning and development have in controlling people's behavior. Right? That's not how adults work. If you go back to the real problem and then you look to see what people are really trying to do and then helping them to do that, and if there is a certain way that is more expected and rewarded, sharing that openly within your organization, you're going to get much more traction than just do it like this. It's go back to the Steve Jobs quote that you see on LinkedIn every day. You don't hire smart people to tell them what to do. You hire smart people so they tell you what to do.
Yeah.
It's that. And I mean, if you're not hiring smart people, then there's another problem. But look, I've probably oversimplified that approach, and maybe it's much more around compliance than I'm alluding to. But if you always go back to starting with a real problem, validating that with your users, that's a problem that they're experiencing, understand what they're trying to achieve and the friction that they are experiencing, you can build useful stuff to help them to do that in a way that the organization both expects and rewards. That is so much easier in the long run than any way of trying to fit people into boxes.
Okay, brilliant. Well, fingers crossed that answered Tom's question there. I'm going to hijack the screen sharing just for a second and just sort of take this opportunity just to say thank you very much to David. That was very, very interesting. Certainly that I got a lot out of that. I hope everybody else did as well. And just to let you know that the upcoming eLearning Network events, we will be hosting the Learning Design Live conference at the World of Learning in Birmingham on the 16th and 17th of October. And our next webinar is actually next week, which is with Jamie Good, and it's talking about chatbots. And then a big date for your diary is the 15th of November in London, which is the eLN annual conference. So have a quick look at our website if you want to come along. So I think that is it from us. Thank you very, very much to David for your time. David, I believe you are staying online if anybody wants to ask you any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to.
So how best would they reach you outside of the webinar?
Right. So if you contact me on Twitter, I'm at David in Learning, or otherwise you'll find me on LinkedIn if you wanted to connect on there, and we can either have a call or we can exchange messages. Either way, I'm happy to continue the conversation.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody who has attended. And thanks again to David. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye, everyone.